Patterns. So this is one of those things where, I mean, I know CGMs are all the rage and you can get them now, but Jen did this a few years ago before that was the thing. And you can get a glucometer really super easy. And as long as your clients aren't afraid of poking their fingers a few times a day for a little bit to figure out what's going on with their patterns, um, this can be very enlightening for them. Um, so, what can we learn from glucose levels? I think there's a distinction here between what we need to know as practitioners, right? When we start talking about all those GLP and GIP and this and that and NRF2, and like we just can throw around all these acronyms for all these things that may affect glucose and cortisol and this and right. And our clients are kind of like, what? Right? Versus what do they need to know and how much should we be teaching them, right? And sometimes the thing that makes using a glucometer with them is one, they're available over the counter now. You can buy them on Amazon, right? You can just go get a glucometer and get some test strips and you're off. Um, you know, it takes you out of the equation, right? Because now it's not you saying, hey, those healthy vegetables, like having 6 sweet potatoes a day might not be helping your blood sugar much, right? You can just say, hey, if you're curious, right? Because we feel like there might be some metabolic stuff happening behind the scenes here, driving some of your symptoms and whatever. Um, they can see it, right? They can spend 3 days really like spend 3 days and walk after every meal and see what that does to your blood sugar, you know,
Yeah.
right? Spend 3 days not eating any carbs. Spend 3 days, seeing what dairy does, right? Um, and just try and figure out what's happening, right? Is there, something else going on, and how many things can we link to what's going on with a glucose level, right? Because there's a lot to learn and discover when you start looking at it. Um, you know, if there's foods that they're reacting to, right? And maybe it's not a true food sensitivity that would ever show up on any test, right? They're not going to get an immune reaction, but their blood sugar definitely shows something, right? Some stress that the body's happening. If there is stress in the body, if there is a chronic infection, if there is something like maybe everything's just like boop, elevated all the time. Like they have a great curve, but it's up here. Um, what is going on that's driving that? Maybe there is a limbic system dysfunction and their body's constantly in fight or flight. So their blood sugar, their body's constantly throwing blood sugar out because it's running, right? It thinks it should be running. So it's got it out there in preparation for that. Um, but you can't do this without the client, right? And so putting it on them to track this and try and then figure out and ask. So a fasting glucose, right? Um, when when do you take a fasting glucose? Um, Immediately, right? Like let's like keep the blood glucose monitor right there next to you, like carry it in your pocket. So when you right and leave it on your bedside table and take your glucose right there. Or do you do it, I don't eat till lunch, so I'm taking my fasting glucose at 11 because I eat, I start prepping my lunch then. Um, there's a big difference in when they're going to take that. Um, so usually, in order to get a good fasting glucose, it's within 10 minutes of waking, right? Like it's pretty quick. And for most people, they're not getting up, getting dressed, doing other things, driving to the lab within 10 minutes of waking. Um, the other thing we are going to look at is what are their glucose levels around food, right? So what's happening around their meal times and what are we eating? We need to know what they're eating in order to figure out if that data is, what is that data showing us? And then looking at average levels throughout the day as they go through their day, what's going on. So yes, fasting glucose should be within 10 minutes of waking. We want to see this somewhere between 78 to 86 was the number. I think it's the range that's on our lab form. Walsh had it a little bit higher, 82 to 88. You may arrive at a different conclusion, right? You might be dealing with people in different um, demographics, right? So you maybe you want your range tighter or bigger or whatever, but decide what feels good for you, for your clients, what you think is a good healthy range based on your training, and go from there. Um, that morning fasting glucose reflects what's happening in our bodies overnight. We've already had this conversation. If you missed it, go back to the hypoglycemia call. It does not reflect dinner the night before in most scenarios. Now, you may have a client where it seems like what they have for dinner really affects their morning fasting glucose, and you've got to go, why is that? What is that piece in the middle there that's making that happen?
That was something that Jen always talked about, and I had a hard time really
Mm-hmm.
getting that because some people were like, "Yeah, I know for sure it does affect me in the morning," and she's like, "No, it doesn't affect you in the morning."
It does, but not
So,
directly. I think there's an indirect effect in that middle piece of what's happening between when you sleep and when you wake could be affected by your dinner, right? Like that could drive something in there, but there's a middle piece, right? Is it estrogen dominance? Is it sleep apnea? Is it, that you're high, that you have insulin resistance or, like what is that piece that's making that happen? It could be different.
yeah,
Because in a perfect world, what you eat at 5 o'clock shouldn't be affecting you 12, 13, 14 hours later,
right,
right? I mean, in a perfect world, right? Whatever you ate at dinner should be processed and out of the body by bedtime.
right.
So,
Yeah, I see that, but it just seems like some people can eat very heavy the night before, and then their numbers are really high the next morning.
mhm. Well, and for
So,
some people, it's that they're not metabolically fit, so
mhm.
they can't go that long without their body like going, danger, danger, blood sugar's dropping. Oh my gosh, right? So they need that snack or they need that thing or they need whatever, or whatever it is, sleep apnea, bad nightmares, hormonal imbalances, menopause, right? I think it's going to be way different, but it's maybe that evening meal sets them up for a better or worse time overnight with whatever dynamic is happening, but it's the dynamic that's happening overnight that's making the meal be more conducive to that scenario,
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. Yeah,
right? I think that was her point. Like you
yeah,
can't just blame the evening meal
right.
because there's people that eat that way, right? And it's the same thing that we say every. You can't blame whatever because it's this other thing that's happening that set them up. They have an environment in their body, right? There that is making that meal not, you know, whatever. Prime the pump for whatever's going on overnight. So, so before eating, we want to see this somewhere, same thing, between 78 and 86, right? You want it to go back down to baseline. If it isn't, right, you want to take into account what's happening right then. Are they getting a good fasting window in between eating, right? Have they waited 4 to 5 hours for their body to come back down to baseline? Are they snacking so it's just always up? Um, so if we don't have this nice return to baseline between meals, what's going on? When we eat, we expect it to rise, but the question is, how much should it rise? Anybody have an idea?
No, I've never really looked at. at that, like after eating,
Hmm.
what it should be.
Well, I think it does have, right, some, obviously, if we're going to have a carb heavy meal versus a steak and a salad, and, there's definitely difference, right? Um, as to how much it may go up, and certain foods are obviously going to be um, more glycemic and make that blood sugar raise. But your glucose should not increase more than about 30 milligrams per whatever that is, DL, deca, whatever.
Close enough.
Yeah, that one, the little D one. And it should return to baseline within about 3 hours. Um, so, to take your client and say, what's your baseline glucose an hour after you eat, where it should be peaking, what is that peak? And then testing again, 3 hours after your meal. So in another 2 hours. Um, and seeing, have we returned back down to baseline? So if our glucose is at 80 before we eat, we would expect it to rise to about 110 within an hour when we're eating an optimal meal for our body, right? And that's the whole thing. Like, what is an optimal meal for this person? Because obviously, everybody has a different type, right? Those people that can eat carbs till the cows come home, and we're all super jealous of them, right? Because their blood sugars just run in this lovely, stable thing, and they are just that's their body type, right? And then we know people that, eat one French fry or eat one little nice roasted potato wedge, and, their blood sugar's. Through the roof. Um, so what's optimal? That's the question, right? What is an optimal meal for this person that's going to, have a small rise in blood sugar and then have it return to optimal within 2 hours or close to it, or three? Um, so what would you think if this person has a blood sugar that, maybe goes up to 110, but then drops below, like maybe it gets to 50 after their meal? What are you thinking?
50 is getting awful low where they wouldn't feel very good, I would think.
Right. But what has happened in the body, do you think, for that to happen? What would drive their blood sugar that low?
Was too much insulin kicked out and then dropped it too much?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would wonder. Are they past that point where insulin resistance is now a thing, where they're pushing out way more insulin than they need, and then their blood sugars are going really low, and they're one of those people that are having the big highs and the big lows, and it might not be going way high because, their body's whipping out that insulin pretty quick and it catches it, but then it drops low. What if it goes super high? What if it goes up to 160? Then what are you thinking?
I'd also wonder about their lifestyle and stress if they're because I know stress will increase your glucose blood level.
Hmm. What questions are you asking your client?
What they ate, when they ate, how they felt.
Hmm.
I'd also see if they were peeing more or drinking more, um, and then how low they go.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering, are they, like on a physiological level, biochemistry level, right? Like, are we not making sufficient insulin now? Have we gone past that where, it's going way up, where we're not, so looking at, pancreatic cell sufficiency, beta cell sufficiency. Um, but yeah, asking all the questions around that. What did you eat? Was it a normal meal? Was it stress? Did you eat on the run? Did you, what was the circumstances around that? So even if it goes up to 160, and it still goes to baseline within 2 hours. Is that okay?
Maybe occasionally, but if it continued to go that high, you're still getting the damage from high glucose,
Yeah.
even momentarily.
Yeah. Maybe that meal was something that like, oh yeah, normally I don't have a whole sweet potato, but I was just craving it and yeah, I had it, and it's not terrible, right? To stress your body that what is hormesis, right? To give your body like the chance to deal with an influx of extra carbs every once in a while, right? Like it's not something you want to do every meal, but if, maybe it was a birthday party celebration and there were some foods that you normally wouldn't eat, but yeah, I broke down because it was grandma's pasta salad and I don't ever eat that very often, right? But I was home and visiting and I did that. Um, so if it's warranted, yeah, maybe your blood sugar will go up, but someone who's metabolically fit is going to be able to handle that and it's going to go back to baseline pretty quick. Now, if they ate a meal with a lot of beans, those take longer to break down. Those can sustain blood sugar at a higher level for many hours, right? So, there are some of those foods where, it might take 3 to 4 hours to go back to baseline.
Are you talking all beans,
Yeah.
Joe?
Yeah, maybe they had, black bean soup, that was their main meal. Um, for some people they can handle that. For other people, that's that's going to raise their blood sugar for a long time. Um, and there's going to be a more sustained raise in blood sugar, right? I mean, beans just take longer to break down. They stay in the gut longer usually. So but how does it affect people? And, you know, having too much insulin for too long over a sustained period of time, we know affects our cardiovascular system, right? So that can be tricky. And we don't want that to be the case for our clients either. So,
Isn't that part of that with cortisol, part of that middle muffin top type stuff too?
yeah, it can be. Um, so this is always a nice way. Like I don't have the ability to move these around, but this would be to graph it for a client when they're giving you blood sugar readings and you say, okay, this is your baseline, right? Obviously, you're going to eat an hour into your meal, it's going to go up, and then, your blood sugar is going to go down. And um, the for some of the examples that we said, let's say this is their baseline and they had that whole sweet potato, which they normally don't have, and their blood sugar didn't go up by 30, but it went up by 60 points, right? And then, if it goes right back down to baseline, you're probably like, oh, all right. But if they did that and then it dipped below, then it's a whole different story, right? Then you're like, hey, maybe you've got the very beginnings of some insulin resistance going on, right? Because that was you know, way more insulin than needed because now we've dipped below. But to actually like start mapping it out for your clients and having them see, like sometimes, the numbers are just numbers, but actually seeing like, hey, this is where it should be in these two lines, right? And when you go above it or below it, maybe they've started with a higher baseline, right? And then you've got to start asking, why is their baseline high? And then, this is a whole nother thing too, right? Like if their baseline's super high and they get really dipped and that happens. So, um, the lab core glucose number on most tests, right, when you get blood work back, is usually not a useful marker. Um, unless I know someone has totally fasted for that, I usually don't even look at it. It's just, there's no context for it, right? Maybe they fasted, but they've gotten up, they've had their coffee maybe, or they've had water, they've gotten in the car, they've dealt with traffic. Maybe they listened to the news on the way to the blood draw. Maybe the thing pinched them, right? Like there's so many things that can affect the blood sugar that once you're up and moving, that's really not a true first morning fasting blood sugar, right? It's really hard. So what you really need to do is take a look at your client based on their glucometer readings and really ask what's going on with the client around each one. If it's raised or if it's lower, what raised it up, right? The body has a reason, right? And we just have to figure out based on our client what that reason might be, right? Um, but your clients can get a lot of feedback very quickly by monitoring this themselves. And for you giving them, you know, this is what I want you to take it. This is how I want you to take it. Um, you know, what if they forgot to wash their hands before they took it? They just made this whole meal, right? They did whatever, touched all the carbs, touched all the stuff, right? Took their blood sugar and forgot to wash their hands. That could raise it. So make sure that they have good practices around doing it. And then, ask enough questions that you can start to figure out why and help them figure out what's working and what is not. Was that helpful?